This lecture is going to be based on this book by Susan Willis from 1991. I think it's largely forgotten these days, but it is also a massively underrated book and one that I highly recommend you dig out of the archive. It's very, very good. Probably one of the best books written about cultural studies in its heyday in the late 80s, early 90s. I'm going to focus on the first chapter, which is about the idea of representation, specifically as it relates to packaging of commodities. So Willis reminds us that representation literally means representation, i.e., taking a thing or an image and presenting it in a different form. So, in this sense, a photo is a representation of the thing that is photographed. We now tend to think this is a poor understanding of what takes place in the process because it is clear that the photograph is also a thing. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. Even if we were to simplify things and speak only of presentations, as Goffman does, it is still problematic because it assumes continuity of the thing being presented. And more problematically, it also assumes that we can draw a hard distinction between a thing and its presentation or its appearance. Now, these are old debates in philosophy and not one that I'm going to rehearse in any great detail here. But the reason why I mention is that I think it's important to think about the different ways we think about representation as we start to think about how representation works in an everyday setting. And for Willis, this comes down to and can be thought about in great detail by thinking about packaging. And a quick walk around a supermarket aisle makes it very clear just how important packaging is. Very few things are sold in supermarkets today that are not packaged. And so this process of packaging everything is comparatively recent. And has had a number of environmental effects. So the commodities boom that really began following World War II has been accompanied by a corresponding boom in packaging. And this, in turn, obviously enough, has led to a massive boom in the production of waste. So, for example, it's estimated that something like 125 million paper coffee cups per day go into the trash in the US alone. And this is the price that the planet pays for our desire for packaging or the way that our desire is focused by packaging. So Willis argues that packaging works in two main ways, one that is visible and one that is not. The key invisible way packaging works is to standardize weights and measures and to create shapes suited to the needs of logistics, specifically shipping or trucking. The logistical side of things is connected to a large set of changes around the mobility of goods. And the standardization of weights and measures is interesting from a cultural point of view because it has come to define our notion of how much. So how much a person should have. And what's very interesting is if you look at a lot of packages that are defined as a single serve, it sort of says this is how much a person should have, whether it's 125 mils of yogurt or 600 mils of milk or whatever. And it has enforced the idea that having more is a good thing. So over the years, portion sizes have grown and correspondingly so have waistlines. Packaging influences how we think about size, and it is clear that size does matter. And this brings us back to the visible ways in which packaging works. And as Willis puts it, the package is a device for hailing the consumer, and she means this in Althusser's sense, and cueing his or her attention by the use of color and design to a particular brand name and commodity type. And here, as I mentioned, she's using the notion of interpolation in Althusser's sense, but the notion of cueing comes from Jacques Attali, who also has a kind of a notion of programming about capturing consumer attention. And Willis goes on to say that the plastic cover replicates the display case or store window on a miniature scale and suggests that each and every item is worthy of display. And so that's perhaps one of the most important things that packaging does, is that it makes the object worthy of display. And when Willis wrote this book in 1990, there was no such thing as the internet. So she didn't know about, but in a way, this clearly anticipates the idea of the unboxing video, that the object packaging is worth looking at for itself. As Tony Bennett reminds us in his book on museums, the model for the department store was in fact a museum, which put antiquities in glass cases. So this idea of display begins with a museum and then carries over into the department store and then into packaging itself. So the paradox of being worthy of display is that what is displayed must not be touched. So display separates the tactile from the visual, and it thus alters our approach to the thing, making us, at least in the first instance, voyeurs. Now, the other thing that Willis reminds us of is that advertising hasn't always existed. 150 years ago, most products wouldn't have been packaged at all, and you would, for example, buy your porridge oats out of a bin and take it home in a paper bag or a hessian sack. Milk was delivered in pails, not bottles or cartons. In other words, we used to be sustainable, but we're not anymore. So packaging was introduced in order to separate commodities, and now as consumers, we know whether we're buying Quaker's oats or Uncle Toby's oats or whatever, the product might be identical in every respect. So our decision to choose one or the other is packaging led. Packaging is also used to promote the idea of purity. It is a sign that the contents are somehow pure. We even read it as a guarantee, although this is in fact false. Contaminated products are a constant feature of everyday life. So notions of purity and hygiene are ideological as much as they are factual. As Willis puts it, we tend to associate hygiene with progress and modernization. It's what separates us from our own past and from others. So we deem other countries as unhygienic by comparison to our own, in part because they don't use as much packaging. So hygiene and purity is emblematized by the contemporary supermarket where everything appears fresh, which, as she reminds us, is another code word that has become quite salient in our time. To achieve this look, items are discreetly shelved, apples in apple bins, potatoes in the potato bin, and so on. Meat is injected with dye and put under UV lights to make it look redder and fresher. Fruit is graded so that only certain colors and shapes make it to the market. Apples are waxed to make them look shiny. And the whole store is refrigerated. And as she says, the cold itself is a sign of purity. So products are wrapped with security seals, so we are reassured they haven't been tampered with, irrespective of what might have happened during the production process. And Willis suggests that this thinking about society Willis suggests that thinking about what society throws away could then be a key to our culture because we throw away all this packaging. Put it another way, what does packaging reveal about cultural desire? For Willis, the most emblematic form of packaging is transparent plastic, the display case windows that get transposed onto the thing itself. She writes, the plastic cover acts as a barrier between the consumer and the product, while at the same time it offers up a naked view of the commodity to the consumer's gaze. And here she's drawing on the work of Lacan and Sartre, but also Laura Mulvey in terms of thinking about the idea of the gaze. And with respect to the idea of something being naked, she is referring to John Berger's book, Ways of Seeing. And here I quote Berger, he says, to be naked is to be oneself. To be nude is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized for oneself. A naked body has to be seen as an object in order to become nude, and nakedness reveals itself. Nudity is placed on display. I suspect Willis would not agree with Berger here because both naked and nude are ideological constructions, she would argue. Equating naked and being oneself is a kind of standard play in advertising, which is why there are so many naked images in advertising. And Willis would also question whether it is possible to see ourselves naked in the idealized way that Berger suggests, because that would imply our own gaze was somehow immune to social construction. Willis goes on to observe that sometimes the plastic cover is molded to fit the contours of the commodity, thus acting like a transparent skin between the consumer's hand and object. Shaped and naked, but also veiled and withheld, the display of commodities is sexualized, she says. And we might go further and argue, as Jameson does, that all display is sexualized. As she puts it, striptease or veiled phallus packaging conflates a want for a particular object with a sexualized form of desire. In this sense, she says, packaging prolongs the process of coming into possession of the commodity. And if we had any doubt about that, we only have to look at the unboxing videos to see just how important this process of delay is in terms of the function of packaging, hence the striptease analogy. So, extending that analogy, we might also say unveiling or unboxing the commodity heightens our interest in the commodity. This waiting is pleasurable in itself, as Tanya Modleski's analysis of the soap opera suggests. What soapies do is construct entertaining forms of waiting. That is, waiting for the hero to change and to become a better man, waiting for the heroine to get what she wants, and so on. One can see the same thing happening in crime fiction, where suspense is, if you like, an organized form of waiting. So, anticipation is the commodity's version of the aesthetic. Packaging makes anticipation the commodity's most gratifying aspect. And it is always anticlimactic once you open the box and throw it away and you're left with a boring old article. Indeed, one might go so far as to say anticipation is more gratifying than the thing itself, because the commodity cannot live up to the expectation of the box. And this was perhaps Lacan's point in his famous formula that sex does not exist. The German theorist Wolfgang Haug argues that commodities have a double reality. He says, first, there is the use value, but then there is the appearance of use value, which is even more important. Indeed, we couldn't understand the function of the logo without thinking along these lines. And this is what advertising focuses on, appearance, not reality. So Marx referred to this dimension of the commodity as the fetish, drawing his ideas from anthropology of primitive rituals. And it comes from the same source that Freud uses for his notion of fetish. This process is also described as reification because it transforms abstract value into actual market value. At the same time, the commodity is alienated, meaning we forget that human labor was required to produce it, which is why Marx calls the commodity dead labor. By the same token, the difference between commodities is obscured by the process of standardization. When everything is given a cash value, that itself is erased. So even more perniciously then, we tend to think the types of labor that go into the production of commodities is similarly standardized. In this way, we ignore the reality of sweated labor, which goes into the production of many, many commodities that we buy in our daily lives. And advertising encourages us to see this standardization as its very opposite. Be yourself, be an individual by buying the same mass-produced thing that a million other people are also buying, is its constant message. And perhaps the most important effect of standardization is to be seen in the way commodities shape and fix gender roles. As Willis puts it, walk into any toy store and you'll see straight away all the toys arranged in strict gender order, pink for girls and any color except pink for boys. And toys, she says, teach children to be consumers. And here you can see that in the connection that's often made between PB narratives and toys. And in many ways, you can think of a children's TV show as a context for advertising toys. And Willis suggests that because of the marketing, toys, children associate growing up with changes in patterns of consumption. For a girl, this means wearing or buying new types of clothes and makeup and so on. So we celebrate age with presents, i.e., commodities, and we wrap them to heighten the anticipation. So children live their birthdays as magical moments of change, but change that is measured through and celebrated by commodities. Through toys and commodities, children anticipate growing up. And in the absence of other forms of social rituals, toys are often the only form of induction into the adult world. And today, this has been, of course, superseded by electronic devices. But nonetheless, children spend their early childhood thinking, when can I be old enough to have one of these devices? So consumption is not only a matter of buying things, we also consume with our eyes. And in fact, this may be the most potent form of consumption there is. So consumption is social. When girls ask for a Barbie doll or a princess dress, they want to participate in a social universe of all the other girls who have Barbies as well, as the imagined universe the princess dress symbolizes. And whilst this has changed, girls not only want to dress in Barbie dresses, they also want to dress as Power Rangers or whatever. The more abstract point that transformation and growing up is done via commodities remains, I think, still very much on point. So socialization into capitalism, she argues, is a process of learning to substitute alienation and commodities for human relationships. Under capitalism, one group social practice is commodity consumption. Our experience of consumption is unsettled and a ceaseless transformation, registered in popular culture as we kind of move through the generations of commodities that we want to buy from early childhood to adulthood. In consumer society, traditions are born overnight and endowed with nostalgic force as a feature of their creation. And this is one of the ways by which the logo functions. So lastly, then, I guess this sort of sums up Willis's argument. Our commodities give us meaning, even though in reality we give them meaning.